You did the right thing. At least, some part of you knows you did. But right now, sitting with the weight of it, replaying the look on their face, reading their messages, lying awake at 3 in the morning with your chest tight and your thoughts spiraling, it doesn't feel right. It feels awful. It feels like something you did to someone. Like you are the one who caused all of this pain. Like somehow, in the process of trying to save yourself, you became the bad guy. And that feeling, that specific, suffocating, disorienting guilt, is what nobody prepares you for when they tell you to leave what isn't right for you. Everyone cheers you on before. Leave. You deserve better. Don't settle. Walk away. But the moment you actually do it, the moment you make the call, send the message, have the conversation, draw the line, suddenly you're alone with a guilt so heavy it makes you question everything. Was I wrong about this? Did I give up too soon? Am I actually the problem? Maybe I should take it back. Maybe I should just try one more time. And here's the part that makes it even more confusing. You're not a cruel person. You're not someone who enjoys hurting people. In fact, and I want you to really hear this, the reason this hurts you so much is probably because you care deeply. Because you are someone with a conscience. Someone with empathy. Someone who feels things fully and takes responsibility seriously. And somehow, that very thing, that sensitivity, that care, has turned into a cage. Because you can feel their pain almost as clearly as your own. And walking away while someone is in pain feels, to a person like you, almost unbearable. So you stay, or you go back, or you never fully leave. You keep one foot in the door just to manage their feelings, just to make sure they're okay, just to prove to yourself, and maybe to them, that you're not the villain in this story. But here's what I want to ask you today. What if the guilt you're feeling isn't evidence that you did something wrong? What if it's actually evidence of how much you care? What if the very fact that leaving hurts you this much, that you're losing sleep, questioning yourself, agonizing over their pain, is proof that you are not the bad person you're afraid you are? And what if, and this is the question that's going to anchor everything we talk about today, what if staying, when you know in your deepest self that it's wrong, is actually the unkinder choice? Not just for you, but for them too. Today we are going to go somewhere that most relationship content never goes. We're not going to talk about red flags or toxic patterns or how to identify the wrong person. You already know it's wrong. That's why you're here. What we're going to talk about is the psychology of why leaving the wrong person feels like a moral crime even when it isn't. We're going to look at the neuroscience of why your brain fights against the decision to go even when every part of you knows you should. We're going to talk about the empathy trap, the way that being a deeply feeling, deeply caring person can make you a prisoner in relationships that are slowly costing you everything. We're going to talk about guilt, real, specific, suffocating guilt, where it actually comes from, why it doesn't mean what you think it means, and why some people, not necessarily consciously, not necessarily with bad intentions, use your guilt to keep you from ever fully leaving. We're going to talk about what it actually costs you to stay for the wrong reasons. The version of yourself you lose. The life that doesn't get lived. The love that doesn't get found by either of you, while you both holding on to something that has already ended in every way that matters. And then we'll talk about something that nobody in the self-help world says clearly enough. Their pain is real. Their heartbreak is genuine. And you are still not responsible for healing it at the cost of your own life. Both of those things are true at the same time. And learning to hold both of them without collapsing is one of the most important things a person can ever learn to do. Here's the surprising truth that I want you to sit with as we go through this together. Research in relationship psychology consistently shows that people who end relationships they know are wrong and who do it with honesty and care are not the ones who cause the most damage. The most damage in relationships is caused by the people who stay too long, who give false hope, who half leave and come back, who remain out of guilt and let resentment quietly poison everything. The kindest thing and the hardest thing are sometimes the exact same thing. Leaving with love, even when it breaks someone's heart, even when they're angry, even when you feel like the villain, can be the most compassionate choice available to you. But to get there, To really get there, we have to start at the beginning, with the guilt that arrived the moment you made your decision. The guilt that has no name but sits on your chest like something permanent. Let's talk about what that guilt actually is, and more importantly, where it really comes from. There's a specific kind of guilt that doesn't make logical sense, and that's what makes it so hard to shake. It's not the guilt of someone who did something genuinely wrong. It's not the guilt of a person who lied, cheated, or caused deliberate harm. It's something quieter and somehow more painful than that. It's the guilt of someone who made a necessary decision and still can't stop feeling like a monster for making it. Psychologists actually have a name for this experience. It's called existential guilt. And unlike regular guilt, which signals that we've violated our own moral code, existential guilt arises when we make choices that are true to ourselves but painful to others. It's the guilt of prioritizing your own life, of choosing your own well-being, of saying, this isn't right for me, even when that truth causes someone else pain. And for people who were raised to put others first, who learned that their worth came from being needed, who were taught that a good person never hurts anyone, existential guilt doesn't just sting. It can be completely paralyzing. Here's what it actually feels like from the inside. You replay the conversation obsessively. You analyze your own motives with a cruelty you would never direct at another person. You catastrophize about their future. Will they be okay? Will they recover? Will they ever trust someone again? You minimize your own pain. Well, my reasons weren't that serious. Other people have it worse. Maybe I was just being selfish. And you oscillate, sometimes within the same hour, between the clarity of knowing you made the right call and the crushing doubt of wondering if you destroyed someone for nothing. And underneath all of it, underneath the replaying and the catastrophizing and the self-analysis, there is a question you keep coming back to. A question that feels almost too vulnerable to say out loud. If I were truly a good person, would this have been necessary in the first place? That question is the heart of the guilt that has no name, and it is one of the most unfair things a genuinely good person can put themselves through, because the premise is completely false. Good people end relationships. Loving people end relationships. Empathetic, conscientious, deeply caring people end relationships, because sometimes ending a relationship is the most honest thing available to you. And honesty, even when it's painful, is not cruelty. But here's what makes this guilt so uniquely stubborn. It doesn't respond to logic. You can know, intellectually, clearly, with complete certainty, that you made the right decision, and still feel the guilt like a physical weight in your body. Still reach for your phone to check on them. Still feel the pull to go back just to make the feeling stop. That's because this guilt isn't living in the rational part of your brain. It's living somewhere much deeper. Somewhere that logic doesn't easily reach. And to understand why, to really understand why leaving someone feels like a moral crime, even when it isn't, we need to go beneath the emotions and look at what's what's actually happening in your brain when you try to walk away. Because what's happening up there is not a character flaw. It's not weakness. It's not confusion. It's biology. And once you understand it, everything starts to make a different kind of sense. Because your brain, the most sophisticated organ in the known universe, is working directly against you. And it has been from the moment you made your decision. There's a reason leaving feels physically painful, not metaphorically painful, not emotionally difficult in a way that's easy to push through, but genuinely, somatically, body-level painful. And that reason has nothing to do with whether the relationship was right or wrong. It has everything to do with how your brain is built. Neuroscientists studying romantic attachment have found that the brain processes social, rejection, and relationship loss in the same neural regions that process physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the part of your brain that lights up when you stub your toe or you burn your hand, is the same part that activates when you experience the loss of a close relationship. In other words, your brain is not being dramatic when it tells you that leaving hurts. It is being completely literal. Leaving someone you were attached to is, neurologically speaking, a form of pain. But it goes even deeper than that. The human brain has a deeply embedded system called the loss aversion bias, a cognitive tendency documented across decades of behavioral research to feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. This means that what you're losing by leaving, the familiarity, the routine, the attachment, even the comfort of the dysfunction, registers in your brain as twice as significant as what you might gain. Freedom, peace, a chance at something real. Your brain literally undervalues all of that compared to the pain of the loss. And then there's the sunk cost fallacy, the psychological tendency to stay invested in something not because it's working, but because of everything you've already put into it. The years, the energy, the compromises, the versions of yourself you gave away trying to make it work. Your brain looks at all of that investment and whispers, you can't walk away from this. Walking away makes all of that mean nothing. But here's the truth about sunk costs that nobody says plainly enough. The time you've already spent is gone, regardless of what you do next. Staying doesn't recover it. Staying doesn't retroactively make the investment worthwhile. It just adds more time to the loss. And yet the brain, with its powerful irrational architecture, keeps pulling you back toward the familiar, even when the familiar is hurting you. And perhaps the most powerful neurological force working against you is the attachment system itself. Research by neuroscientist Helen Fisher shows that romantic attachment activates the same dopamine reward pathways as addiction. The brain of someone in a bonded relationship, even a painful one, responds to thoughts of that person the way an addicted brain responds to thoughts of a substance, with craving, with urgency, with a pull that overrides rational judgment. Which means leaving isn't just emotionally hard, it's neurochemically hard. You are not weak for struggling with this. You are human, with a human brain doing exactly what human brains are designed to do. But here's what I need you to stay with, because this is where it gets really important. There is one specific type of person for whom all of these neurological forces hit the absolute hardest. Someone whose brain and nervous system are wired in a particular way that makes leaving not just difficult, but almost psychologically impossible. And there's a very good chance that person is you. You feel things deeply. You always have. You walk into a room and you sense the emotional temperature before anyone says a word. You can tell when someone is hurting, even when they're pretending they're fine. You absorb other people's emotions almost involuntarily. Their sadness becomes your sadness. Their anxiety bleeds into your nervous system. Their pain registers in your body like it's your own. This is not a flaw. This is one of the most profound and beautiful capacities a human being can have. But in the context of leaving someone, in the context of making a decision that you know will cause another person real pain, this capacity becomes something else entirely. It becomes a trap. Psychologists and researchers who study high empathy individuals have found something that is both fascinating and quietly devastating. Empathetic people don't just imagine how someone else feels. They actually experience a neurological echo of that person's emotional state in their own nervous system. Mirror neurons, the brain cells responsible for empathy, fire in response to witnessing another person's pain in a way that partially replicates the pain experience in the observer. In other words, when you watch someone suffer because of a decision you made, you don't just feel bad about it. You feel it in your body as if it's happening to you. And this changes everything about how you experience the act of leaving. Because for a highly empathetic person, leaving isn't just about managing your own grief, your own guilt, your own adjustment. It's about simultaneously carrying the emotional weight of the person you left, their devastation, their confusion, their loneliness. You feel all of it alongside your own. And the combined weight of both emotional experiences is for many empathetic people simply unbearable. So they go back. Not because they've changed their mind about the relationship. Not because the problems have been solved or the incompatibilities have disappeared. But because the alternative, continuing to feel that person's pain from a distance, knowing you caused it, unable to fix it, is more than their nervous system can sustain. This is the empathy trap. And it is one of the least talked about and most powerful reasons why genuinely good, deeply, feeling people stay in the wrong relationships for years, sometimes for entire lifetimes, past the point where they know, with absolute clarity, that they should go. And here's what makes it even more complicated. The empathy trap doesn't just keep you in relationships that are wrong for you. It changes the way you see yourself inside those relationships. It makes you responsible, in your own mind, for managing another person's emotional world, for keeping them okay, for making sure your choices never cause them pain. And when that is your operating framework, leaving becomes not just difficult, but feels morally impermissible. But there's something else at work here, something beyond the empathy, something specific to this relationship, to how it was built and what it was built on, that made leaving feel not just painful, but almost structurally impossible. And understanding it is going to explain something you've probably been wondering about yourself for a long time. Why this person? Why this relationship? Why, out of everyone you've ever known, is this the one that feels impossible to walk away from? Think about the early days of this relationship. Think about how it felt. There was probably something electric about it. Something that felt different from other connections. More intense, more consuming, more real than anything you'd experienced before. The highs were extraordinary. When it was good, it was so good that it felt like evidence. Like proof that this was something worth fighting for. Worth staying for. Worth enduring the hard parts for. And then the hard parts came. And they were genuinely hard. There were moments of real pain. Real disconnection. Real doubt. But then, just when you were starting to pull away, just when you were beginning to build some emotional distance, something would shift. A moment of tenderness. A glimpse of the person you fell for. A conversation that reminded you of what this could be. And the hope would flood back in. And you'd stay. This pattern, this alternating cycle of pain and connection, distance and tenderness, doubt and hope, has a name in psychology. It's called intermittent reinforcement. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most psychologically powerful forces in human behavior. Research originally conducted on animals and later extensively studied in human relationships shows that unpredictable reward schedules, getting what you need sometimes, but not always, with no reliable pattern, create stronger psychological attachment than consistent positive reinforcement. In other words, a relationship that occasionally gives you what you need is harder to leave than one that consistently gives you what you need. Your brain, seeking the reward of connection and love, becomes hypervigilant. It learns to watch for the good moments. It begins to organize itself around the hope of the next one. And that hope, that intermittent, unpredictable, just real enough hope, becomes the thing that keeps you tethered long after the evidence has told you this isn't working. And layered on top of that is something called emotional dependency, the psychological state in which another person's approval, presence, and emotional response becomes central to your own sense of stability and self-worth. When you're emotionally dependent on someone, their moods become your moods. Their withdrawal feels like abandonment. Their anger feels like confirmation of your deepest fears about yourself. And leaving them doesn't just feel like losing a relationship. It feels like losing your emotional anchor, like stepping off solid ground into open water with nothing to hold on to. None of this happened because you are weak or naive or foolish. It happened because you are human. And because this relationship, in its specific architecture, was extraordinarily effective at keeping you inside it. Understanding that is not about making excuses. It's about releasing yourself from the false narrative that staying this long was a personal failure. But now we need to go somewhere even more uncomfortable. Because it's not just the neuroscience, not just the empathy, not just the intermittent reinforcement that kept you here. There's something else. Something in the specific story you've been telling yourself about who the villain is in this situation. And that story, the one where you are the one who caused all the damage, the one who failed, the one who broke something precious, that story did not write itself. Something helped write it, and we need to talk about that now. Here's something that nobody wants to say in the conversation about leaving relationships. Sometimes, not always, not in every situation, but sometimes, the guilt you're feeling was put there. Not deliberately, not as part of some calculated plan, but through the natural, human, deeply understandable way that people respond when they're afraid of losing someone. They reach for whatever will make you stay. And for someone like you, someone with a conscience, someone who cares deeply, someone who cannot bear the thought of being the cause of another person's pain, guilt is the most effective thing in the world at making you stay. Psychologists call this guilt induction, and it happens in relationships more commonly than most people realize. It doesn't require a manipulative person. It doesn't require bad intentions. It just requires someone who is scared of losing you, and who, consciously or not, communicates their pain in a way that makes you feel personally responsible for fixing it. The crying that starts the moment you try to have a serious conversation. The reminders of everything they've sacrificed for this relationship. The quiet withdrawal that makes you feel like you're off. The gover with her, widder done something unforgivable just by expressing doubt. The statements, said softly, said with genuine feeling, that translate to you are the only thing keeping me okay. And here's where it becomes the villain narrative. Because when someone's pain is visible, immediate, and clearly connected to your decision, when they are hurting right in front of you and you are the reason, the story writes itself almost automatically. You are the one causing the suffering. They are the one suffering. And in that simple visual equation, the roles feel obvious. You are the bad guy, but that equation leaves out something crucial. It leaves out what was happening to you inside the relationship. The slow erosion of your sense of self. The needs that went unmet. The parts of you that went unseen. The version of yourself you were quietly losing the longer you stayed. That suffering is invisible. It doesn't cry in front of anyone. It doesn't send messages at midnight. It just accumulates, silently, in the body and the spirit of the person who is trying their best to make something work that fundamentally isn't working. And because your suffering is invisible and theirs is not, you cast yourself as the villain, even though the full story is far more complex than that single moment of visible pain. This is one of the most important things I want you to take from this video. The person who cries when you leave is not automatically the victim, and the person who leaves is not automatically the villain. Pain does not determine fault. Reaction does not determine truth. And the loudest grief in the room is not always the most significant grief in the room. But here's what we haven't fully talked about yet. The cost. The specific, real, accumulating cost of what happens to you when you stay in a relationship for the wrong reasons. When you remain not from love, not from genuine hope, but from guilt, from fear of being the bad guy, from the inability to tolerate another person's pain. Because that cost is higher than most people ever allow themselves to acknowledge. And it's time to look at it clearly. Nobody talks about what it does to a person to stay somewhere their heart has already left. Not the drama of a bad relationship, not the arguments, not the obvious dysfunction, but the quiet, daily, accumulating weight of being somewhere that is no longer right for you, of showing up to something you no longer fully believe in, of performing a version of yourself that is slowly, invisibly shrinking. Research in relationship psychology has consistently shown that staying in a relationship characterized by emotional incompatibility, not abuse, not cruelty, just fundamental wrongness, produces chronic low-grade stress responses in the body. Elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep architecture, a persistent sense of low-level anxiety that becomes so constant it starts to feel like just the way you are. You forget that you weren't always this tired. You forget that you didn't always feel this flat. You normalize a level of depletion that is actually your body's signal that something essential is being compromised. And then there's the resentment. The quiet, slow-building resentment that grows in the space between who you are and who you're gay. When pretending to be. You can love someone and resent them at the same time. You can care deeply about a person and feel a growing, uncomfortable anger at what staying with them is costing you. That resentment rarely announces itself dramatically. It seeps into the small moments, the way you respond to their texts, the way you feel when they walk into the room, the way you find yourself daydreaming about a version of your life that doesn't include this relationship. And because you are a good person, because you feel that resentment and judge yourself for it, you push it down. You try harder. You recommit. You tell yourself you just need to be more patient, more understanding, more generous. And for a while, that works. Until it doesn't. Until the resentment surfaces again, bigger and more insistent than before. Here's the profound truth underneath all of this. Resentment in a relationship is not a character flaw. It is a message. It is your emotional system telling you, with increasing urgency, that your needs matter, that your life matters, that you cannot give genuinely from a place of depletion. That love, built on self-sacrifice, eventually collapses under its own weight, not because love isn't real, but because it cannot survive the slow disappearance of the person doing the loving. And there is one more cost that nobody names clearly enough. The cost to them. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about staying out of guilt. When you stay with someone while resenting them, while feeling fundamentally wrong about the relationship, while performing love you no longer fully feel, you are not giving them a gift. You are giving them a shadow, a performance, a relationship-shaped object that looks like the real thing from the outside, but is hollow at its center. They deserve more than that. You deserve more than that. And somewhere, in the part of you that has been trying to find the courage to listen, you already know it. So if staying is costing you this much, if the weight of remaining is this heavy, then what does mean to let go? Not the guilt-drenched, villain-feeling version of leaving, but the real version, the honest version. What is letting go, really? Let's talk about what it actually means. Because I think you've been carrying a definition of leaving that isn't true, and it's time to put it down. Letting go does not mean you didn't love them. Read that again. Letting go does not mean the love wasn't real. Some of the most genuine love in the world exists inside relationships that simply cannot work. Love is not the only ingredient required for a relationship to be right. You can love someone's laugh and be fundamentally incompatible with their vision for life. You can love someone's kindness and still need something they are unable to give. You can love a person fully, genuinely, without reservation, and still need to leave. And that leaving does not erase the love. It does not retroactively make the love false. It is simply the honest acknowledgement that love, on its own, is not always enough. Letting go does not mean they are a bad person. This is one of the most liberating reframes available to you. The story of a relationship ending does not require a villain. It does not require someone to have been wrong, or cruel, or deliberately harmful. Sometimes two people are simply not right for each other. Sometimes the timing was wrong. Sometimes the versions of you that met were exactly right for that chapter, and the versions of you that exist now have grown in different directions. That is not failure. That is life. And ending something that isn't right does not make either person a bad human being. Letting go does not mean you failed. There is a cultural narrative, particularly around long relationships, around relationships where a lot was invested, around relationships where the other person is still hoping, that says leaving equals giving up, that a good person would have found a way, that real love conquers all. And that narrative is not just unhelpful, it is genuinely harmful. Because it frames relationships as problems to be solved through sufficient effort, rather than living things that either grow toward each other or don't. You did not fail this relationship. You were honest about it. And honesty, even when it ends something, is an act of integrity, not of failure. And here's what letting go actually is. When you strip away all the guilt and the villain narrative and the false definitions. It is a choice to live truthfully. It is the decision to stop performing a version of love that has become hollow and to make space for both of you, for something real. It is the act of trusting yourself enough to honor what you know, even when what you know is uncomfortable. Even when what you know causes pain in the short term. But, and this is where the hardest part lives, honoring what you know does not make their pain disappear. Their heartbreak is real. Their grief is genuine. And holding that truth alongside your own is one of the most difficult emotional tasks a person can face. Because you want their pain to not be real. You want there to be a version of this where everyone is okay. Where you can leave and they can be fine and nobody has to hurt. That version doesn't always exist. And what you do with that reality, how you hold both your truth and their pain at the same time is what we need to talk about next. Their pain is real. Let's start there. Let's not minimize it, rationalize it, or look away from it. If you left someone who loved you, someone who wanted this to work, someone who is now grieving a future they had imagined, their heartbreak is genuine and it deserves to be acknowledged, not weaponized against you, not used as evidence that you did something wrong, but acknowledged, seen, honored as the real human experience that it is. Because here is what compassion actually looks like in this situation. It's not going back. It's not managing their pain by sacrificing your truth. It's not performing love you don't feel to spare them the grief of its absence. Real compassion, the kind that actually serves another person's long-term well-being, sometimes looks like giving them the truth, even when the truth hurts, because the alternative is keeping them in something that isn't real. Relationship therapist Esther Perel has written and spoken extensively about the difference between kindness and niceness in relationships. Niceness, she argues, is the avoidance of discomfort. It is telling someone what they want to hear, staying when you should go, softening the truth until it becomes a lie, all to spare the immediate pain of an honest moment. Kindness, on the other hand, is the willingness to tell the truth with care, to cause short-term pain in service of long-term dignity, to respect another person enough to be honest with them, even when honesty is the harder choice. Staying with someone because you cannot tolerate their pain is not kindness. It is niceness. And niceness, in this context, is actually a form of harm. Because every month you stay out of guilt is another month they spend in a relationship that is not fully real. Another month they are not free to grieve and move and eventually find something that is actually right for them. You are not protecting them by staying. You are suspending them. Now here's what I want to speak to directly. The specific thought that visits you at 3 a.m, the one that says, but what if they don't recover? What if this breaks them? What if I am responsible for what happens to them next? This thought feels like love. It feels like care. But it contains within it a belief that is worth examining very carefully. The belief that another adult human being, say emotional survival, is your personal responsibility. It isn't. That is not a cold statement. It is a true one. You are responsible for how you treat people. You are responsible for honesty, for decency, for handling this with as much care as possible. But you are not responsible for another person's capacity to survive loss. That capacity lives inside them. It was there before you. It will be there after you. And assuming that they cannot survive your absence is not love. It is a subtle underestimation of who they are. Their pain is real, and they will survive it. Both of those things are true. And holding both, without collapsing into guilt or hardening into indifference, is the for emotional work that this moment is asking of you. Which brings us to the practical reality of all of this. Because understanding the psychology is one thing, but you still have to actually navigate this. The conversation, the aftermath, the guilt spirals, the moments of doubt so intense they feel like certainty. So let's talk about how to actually do this. Not perfectly, not without pain, but with as much clarity, compassion, and self-respect as possible. The first thing, and this might sound simple, but it is genuinely the hardest part, is to get clear inside yourself before you try to communicate anything to anyone else. Not clear in the sense of having no doubts. Doubt is normal. Doubt is human. But clear in the sense of knowing your truth. The specific, honest, personal truth of why this isn't right. Not the version you've softened to protect their feelings. Not the version you've complicated to protect yourself from guilt. The actual truth. Write it down if you need to. Say it out loud to yourself. Because if you don't know clearly what you're communicating, the conversation will become a negotiation. And negotiations in this context almost always end with you staying. The second thing is to have the conversation once, clearly, and with finality. One of the most painful and prolonged experiences in ending a relationship is the repeated conversation, the leaving and returning, the reopening of the discussion, the allowing of negotiation that gives false hope and extends the suffering for everyone involved. This is not cruelty. Once, clearly, with kindness, is actually the most compassionate approach available. Because clarity, even when it's painful, ends the uncertainty. And uncertainty is often more damaging than the truth. The third thing is to create real distance in the aftermath. Not to punish, not out of coldness, but because genuine healing for both of you cannot happen in the ongoing presence of the connection, the checking in, the responding to late night messages, the staying available out of guilt. All of it prevents the emotional completion that both of you need to actually move forward. Distance is not abandonment. It is a necessary condition for healing. And the fourth thing, perhaps the most important, is to stop prosecuting yourself. The guilt will come. The second guessing will come. The 3 a.m. spirals will come. And when they do, I want you to have something to come back to. A single question. Ask yourself, am I going back because something has genuinely changed? Or am I going back because I cannot tolerate the discomfort of having done the right thing? Almost always, in the quiet honesty of that question, you will find your answer. You can do this with love. You can do this with care. You can be a good person and still leave. And on the other side of this, on the other side of all the guilt and the doubt and the grief, there is something waiting for you that I want to spend a moment making real for you. Because you need to know what you're walking toward, not just what you're walking away from. Here's what becomes possible when you finally stop staying out of guilt. And I want you to really let yourself imagine this. Not as a fantasy, not as a distant maybe, but as a real future that is available to you the moment you stop holding yourself in place. You get your energy back, not all at once, not immediately, but slowly, undeniably. You notice that the chronic low-level exhaustion that became your baseline starts to lift. The mental bandwidth that was consumed by managing the relationship, by monitoring their moods, by performing okayness, by carrying the weight of something that wasn't working, that bandwidth comes back to you. And what you do with it will surprise you. You remember who you are. This is the one that tends to catch people off guard. When you've been inside a wrong relationship for a long time, you adapt to it. You reshape yourself around it. Your opinions, your interests, your sense of what you deserve, what's normal, what's possible. And when you leave, when you finally have space that is just yours, you start to find the parts of yourself that went quiet. The things that made you you before you started shrinking yourself to fit. They come back. Not all at once, but they come back. You become available to something real. This is perhaps the most profound shift of all, because while you are holding on to something that isn't right, out of guilt, out of fear, out of the inability to tolerate the discomfort of leaving, you are not available. Not truly. Not for the kind of connection that is actually right for you. The relationship that could hold all of you. Not the adapted, diminished, guilt-managed version of you. But all of you cannot find you while you are still holding the staffing. This means something. And here's the thing about the person who is right for you. They are not going to need you to be smaller. They are not going to need you to manage their emotional world at the expense of your own. They are not going to make you feel like a villain for having needs, for having limits, for being a full and complex human being who sometimes needs to make hard choices. The right relationship will not require you to disappear inside it. You deserve to know what that feels like. And the only way to find out is to be willing to leave what isn't it. Which brings us to the final truth. The one that holds everything we've talked about together. The one I want to leave sitting in the center of your chest long after this video ends. Let's bring this home, because we've covered a lot of ground today. And I don't want you to leave without really sitting with what you've just moved through. We started with that feeling. The one that brought you here. The guilt. The confusion, the suffocating sense that doing the right thing made you the bad person. And we walked through why that feeling exists. Not because you are a villain, but because you are someone with a conscience so developed, an empathy so deep, a heart so genuinely invested in the well-being of others, that even necessary pain feels like a crime when you're the one causing it. We talked about what your brain is doing when you try to leave. The neuroscience of attachment, the cruelty of loss aversion, the psychological trap of intermittent reinforcement. We talked about the empathy trap, how the very thing that makes you beautiful makes leaving feel unbearable. We talked about the villain narrative and how it gets written. We talked about the hidden cost of staying, the slow erosion, the quiet resentment, the version of yourself you lose one day at a time inside something that stopped being right a long time ago. And we talked about the hardest truth of all, that their pain is real and you are still not responsible for healing it at the cost of your own life. That both of those things can be true simultaneously. That holding them both without collapsing is not coldness. It is the most mature and genuine form of compassion available to you. Now here is the final insight, the one I want you to carry with you. Leaving the wrong person is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of honesty. And honesty, real honesty, the kind that costs something, is one of the deepest forms of respect you can offer another human being. You are not saying they are worthless. You are saying this is not true anymore. And giving someone the truth, even when it breaks their heart in the short term, is infinitely more loving than keeping them in something hollow to spare yourself the discomfort of their grief. The villain of this story was never you. The villain was the fear of their pain, the fear of being seen as the one who gave up, the fear of the guilt. And you faced all of it anyway. That is not what villains do. That is what extraordinarily brave people do. If this video reached something in you today, if it named something your face, please leave a comment below and tell me where you are in this. Are you trying to leave? Did you already leave and you're still carrying the guilt? I want to hear from you. And if you know someone who needs this conversation right now, share this with them. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is hand someone the words they couldn't deal. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because this is the kind of conversation we come back to here, every single time. You are not the villain. You never were.